For 28 years, my hometown whispered that 5 sisters vanished because we sinned, yet the real reason could ruin a saint. I'm Ruth, and I'm old enough now that fear doesn't get to boss me around the way it used to. Still, when September rain taps the window at night, my hands remember the stone wall, the mud, and the sound of breath held too long. Have you ever carried a secret so heavy you start walking like you're apologizing to the floor? Back then, I was a quiet girl who liked to watch more than talk. Folks mistook that for meekness. They were wrong. Watching teaches you patterns, like how kindness can become a costume, and how a room can turn cold even when the furnace is working. I entered St. Brigid's House of Mercy at 16, not pushed, not tricked, but eager. I thought I was choosing peace. I didn't know I was also choosing a cage someone else would later lock. Our days were stitched together with bells: rise before sunrise, prayer, chores, supper, prayer again. There were 5 of us under one roof, and we acted like sisters because we were. Sister Clara baked bread that could make a hard man soften. Sister Beatrice kept the little library and spoke like every book was a friend. Sister June taught the neighborhood children and laughed from her belly, the kind of laughter that makes you want to laugh too. And little Sister Lily, just 19, moved like a sparrow, always trying not to take up space. I was the garden keeper and the kitchen helper, happiest with dirt under my nails and quiet around my shoulders. Our Mother Superior, Sister Bernadette, ran the place like a steady clock, strict, yes, but fair. Rules with no tenderness become cruelty, she'd say. And tenderness with no rules becomes chaos. Doesn't that sound like wisdom you'd want to trust? We did trust it, until the new priest arrived and began bending every rule that protected us. Father Callahan came to our parish after the older priest was transferred. He was tall, polished, admired by the townspeople the way a shiny car is admired, from a distance, with envy. In public he spoke about virtue and sacrifice. In private he asked questions that didn't feel like guidance, they felt like fingers testing a bruise. The first time I felt my stomach tighten was during confession. He leaned forward and lowered his voice, and his words pressed where they didn't belong. I walked back to the convent thinking, am I imagining this? Or am I finally seeing clearly? His visits multiplied, always with a reason that sounded holy, a book he needed, a meeting he must have, a talk he owed a young sister. He brought gifts, too, because gifts can feel like ropes wrapped in ribbon. Sister Beatrice received a rare volume, Sister June got a new set of chalk for the classroom, Lily was handed a medal as if she'd earned it. And yet, the air changed whenever he stepped inside. Have you ever watched a room go quiet without anyone saying, "Be quiet"? That's what happened to us. The first clear proof wasn't a confession or a rumor. It was a sight. I went to the library for a jar of salve we kept near the books because the room stayed cool. When I opened the door, Lily was pinned between a shelf and Father Callahan's body. He held her wrist too firmly, and her face looked like she'd fallen into a deep hole and couldn't find the ladder. He released her fast, smiled at me like I'd interrupted a prayer, and asked if I needed assistance. My throat closed. Lily wouldn't meet my eyes. That night she cried without sound in the washroom, pressing a towel to her face like it could erase what happened. I wanted to run to Sister Bernadette, but our Mother Superior had come down with a sickness that stole her breath and kept her in bed. Her strength, the strength that held our little world upright, was suddenly folded up like a chair and stored away. And the moment she weakened, Father Callahan became bold enough to show his real appetite. I asked Lily, gently, what he'd said to her. She shook so hard the beads in her hand rattled. He told me obedience is holiness, she whispered. He said if I speak, I'll be the one condemned. Do you hear the cruelty in that? A man using heaven as a threat. I went to Sister Beatrice, because she had the sharpest mind and the calmest voice. I told her what I saw, what I suspected, what Lily feared. She stared at the wall for a long time, as if her brain needed silence to keep from cracking. Then she said one word, evidence. Not vengeance. Not gossip. Evidence, because a community can ignore tears, but it struggles to ignore a record. We began writing down dates, times, places, exact phrases, like we were stitching a net strong enough to catch a lie. And while we wrote, Father Callahan started circling Sister June, the one who used to laugh. June's laughter faded first. Then her appetite. Then her light. One afternoon I found her in the pantry, holding her arm as if it didn't belong to her. A bruise bloomed under her sleeve. She didn't want to say what happened, but she didn't have to. Her eyes told the story with a kind of shame that didn't belong to her. I wanted to scream in the chapel. Instead, I did what women are taught to do when danger wears a collar. I tried to manage the risk. I rearranged chores so nobody was alone with him. I invented tasks that required pairs. I offered to accompany Lily everywhere, even to fetch laundry soap. Father Callahan noticed, of course. Predators notice fences. Soon he began planting ideas in other minds, whispers about my attitude, my rebellious streak, my confusion. Sister Clara started watching me the way you watch a pot that might boil over. Isn't it strange how quickly a good woman can become suspicious when authority points a finger? And then I made my most desperate move. I went to the regional church office in town on an errand I was permitted to do, medical supplies, paperwork, those kinds of things. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the folder of notes. I waited hours, staring at a painting on the wall, trying not to faint. When the bishop's assistant finally ushered me in, I spoke carefully, plainly, and with more courage than I felt. I described what we'd witnessed, what Lily endured, what June endured, how Father Callahan used his position like a key to locked doors. The bishop listened without expression, the way some men listen when they've already decided what's convenient. He said the right words, serious accusations, proper concern, then added the poison, we must avoid scandal. He told me to keep silent while he looked into it. I left with a thin ribbon of hope. 2 nights later, Father Callahan appeared at the convent after dark, furious in the face and sweet in the voice. And by morning, I learned my hope had been sold out. Father Callahan cornered Sister Beatrice in a room for nearly an hour. When she came out, her face looked hollowed. He passed me in the hallway and murmured something about punishment and lies, like he was quoting a rulebook only he owned. Then Beatrice told me the truth. The bishop had been told everything, by Father Callahan. My complaint, my name, my notes, all delivered like a gift. He says you're unstable, Beatrice whispered. They believe him. They want you transferred far away. The next morning, the order was read aloud. I was to be sent to an isolated house in the West for disobedience and slander. Father Callahan stood there enjoying every syllable. It wasn't just that justice failed, it was that the system turned its teeth on the person who tried to stop harm. Have you ever realized you're inside a machine that grinds the wrong bones? That day I understood, if I obeyed, Lily and June would be left alone with him. So I chose the only door still open. We met in the storage cellar among jars and potatoes, whispering like children hiding from a storm. I told them I wouldn't go. I told them I was leaving, and I was not leaving alone. Beatrice argued we'd look guilty. June said, bitter as vinegar, they already call us guilty. Lily just wept, small and shaking. Sister Clara, older than all of us and loyal to the convent for decades, sat silent so long I thought she'd refuse. Then she spoke, if staying means watching my girls get broken, then staying isn't holy. That settled it. 5 women with no money, no car, and no safe friends were about to disappear. Our walls were high, and the gate screeched. The top of the stone was set with jagged glass, a cruel little crown. We needed a way out that didn't announce itself. We also needed someone outside, someone not dazzled by Father Callahan's sermons. I prayed differently then. Not fancy words. Just a plea, send help that isn't another trap. And help arrived in work boots. Mr. Harlan delivered vegetables twice a week. He was quiet, weathered, and careful with his eyes. While I unloaded crates, he asked softly, "Are you ladies all right?" I tried to smile it away, but he didn't look fooled. He told me his daughter had once joined a religious house and came home changed, silent, wrecked. If you need a hand, he said, I won't ask questions in public. My heart thudded. Was he safe? Or was this how we got caught? We traded notes tucked beneath cabbage leaves. He told me about a weak section of the rear wall where an old oak leaned close, its branches hanging like a ladder. No glass there, he wrote. He would hide a rope ladder near the bushes and wait with his truck on a back road during a hard rain, when sound would be swallowed. We gathered what we could: identification papers, medicine, plain clothing. The hardest part wasn't packing, it was deciding what grief to leave behind. The night before we ran, another sister, one who had always defended Father Callahan, found us in the cellar. I expected screaming, betrayal, a locked door. Instead, she pressed a small roll of bills into my hand. I was afraid, she admitted. I pretended not to see. You don't have to. Doesn't that break your heart, how fear can turn good people into furniture? We begged her to come, but she shook her head. My life is already set, she said. Yours isn't. At midnight, the bell tolled and the rain came down like a curtain. We removed our habits and folded them carefully, not as an insult to faith, but as a farewell to the only uniform we'd ever known. In borrowed clothes, we looked like strangers wearing our own faces. June went first with a bundle of sheets tied into a rough rope. I climbed next, fingers numb, skirt soaked, heart loud. Lily followed, then Beatrice. Sister Clara struggled, and for a terrible moment her foot slipped. I reached back, grabbed her wrist, and felt bone and life fighting to hold on. She made it. We dropped to the far side and ran, 5 women splashing through mud, not criminals, not runaways for romance, but survivors refusing to be eaten. Mr. Harlan's old truck waited where he promised. 3 of them crouched in the cab. June and I lay in the back under a tarp that smelled like feed. The road rattled my teeth. I kept thinking, if headlights appear, it's over. After miles that felt like years, the truck slowed, and Mr. Harlan whispered, we're safe, for now. He hid us in an unused barn outside town with mattresses, canned food, and a lantern. We held hands and prayed, not in polished phrases, but in raw gratitude. For the first time in months, we slept without waiting for a door to creak. In the morning, Clara offered me coffee from a small stove and said, amazed, I forgot sleep could feel like this. Mr. Harlan returned with news. The convent had erupted, police notified, Father Callahan raging, telling anyone who'd listen that we were immoral and unstable. We needed new names, new ties, new history. Beatrice wrote our cover story like a teacher making lesson notes. We became a family displaced by a flood. I became Helen Parker, a young widow with skills at a needle. Lily became my sister, Marie. June and Beatrice became cousins. Clara became our aunt. We practiced until the lies sounded ordinary. Have you ever repeated a sentence so many times it starts to feel true, even when it hurts? Then we were loaded into a delivery truck and carried south in darkness. Mr. Harlan's cousin ran a small roadside inn in the mountains. His wife didn't ask questions, she simply said, you're safe here. Those words, plain as bread, made me cry. We stayed hidden for weeks, then months. But the world kept turning, and so did gossip. Newspapers called us missing. Some suggested we'd stolen money. Some hinted at men. Father Callahan smiled for cameras and preached about betrayal. When we learned Sister Bernadette died after our disappearance, heart failing under the shock, I felt guilt like a stone in my mouth. We couldn't return to mourn her. We couldn't even send a letter. We carried grief quietly, like contraband. With help we never asked details about, we got documents that matched our new lives. Work came in a factory city, sewing uniforms for men who'd never know our names. The work was repetitive, but it steadied the mind. Slowly, we learned pay phones, bus routes, grocery stores, all the ordinary things that feel foreign when you've lived behind stone walls. Isn't it strange how freedom can feel like another kind of fear at first? Still, we kept going. Years passed in small steps, a better rental, a second-hand sofa, a neighbor's wave. We prayed at night in whispers, not because we lacked faith, but because we couldn't risk being overheard. Then the losses began. Aunt Clara, Sister Clara, died first, a sudden stroke in a kitchen far from the convent that had been her whole adult life. We buried her under a name that wasn't hers, and I hated the paper for not knowing her. Beatrice rose at work because she was brilliant, but illness found her anyway, quiet, sneaky, unfair. She told me she was dying before the doctor did, because she'd read her own body like she read books. Promise me, she whispered, that the truth won't die with us. She pressed a notebook into my hand, pages filled with dates, details, and even names of earlier victims, proof that we weren't the beginning. Silence feeds cruelty, truth starves it. Beatrice died with my hand in hers, and afterward the world felt less anchored. June followed years later, her heart worn out from carrying what never should have been hers. Only Lily and I remained. Lily, Marie, built something resembling peace, a husband, 2 children, a porch with wind chimes. She begged me not to pull her back into the past. My kids don't need that shadow, she said. I understood. I didn't argue. But I watched the news the way you watch a cracked dam. And one day, there he was, Father Callahan honored at a banquet, praised as a pillar, smiling like polished silver. I threw up in my sink. Rage isn't pretty in an old woman, but it's honest. I wondered how many others he'd hurt while we hid. I wondered whether our silence had become his shield. Have you ever questioned a choice you made for survival? That question haunted me for years. Then, one winter night, I finally opened Beatrice's notebook again and read every line under a bright lamp, like I was warming truth with light. The details were worse than I remembered, and stronger than any rumor. And then I saw the catalyst I needed, a new assistant priest arriving in our hometown. The article said Father Daniel Mercer was young, stubborn about ethics, and known for defending vulnerable people. One line caught my breath. He'd entered the priesthood after his sister, a former novice, died young, and he spoke about protecting the faithful from corruption. It might have been coincidence, but my bones said no. I packed Beatrice's notebook, drove back toward the place I'd fled, and felt every mile like a confession. At the parish office, my palms sweated as I asked for a private meeting. When the door closed, I said, "My name is not Helen Parker." His eyes narrowed, cautious. I told him who I was and what year we vanished. At first he looked like he might dismiss me as a lonely old woman. Then I named details only someone inside could know. His face changed, shock to anger to sorrow. "Tell me," he said, voice low. So I did. I told him about Lily, June, Clara, Beatrice, our Mother Superior's sickness, the bishop's betrayal, the rain, the wall, the tarp, the years of hiding. When I placed the notebook in his hands, his fingers trembled. "This is," he began, and couldn't finish. He believed me. Not politely. Not halfway. Fully. I cried harder than I had in years, because being believed is a kind of medicine. "Why now?" he asked. I told him about funerals under false names, about Lily's fear, about my promise to Beatrice. "I can't carry this to my grave," I said. He nodded once, firm. "Then you won't carry it alone." Over the next week, he brought in a newer bishop known for taking abuse seriously. They recorded my statement properly, checked old files, and searched archives that hadn't been touched in decades. And in a drawer, we found the smoking letter. It was dated 2 years before our escape, an earlier superior warning church leadership about Father Callahan's behavior around young women. In the margin, a short note, handled internally. No transfer. No restriction. Nothing. My breath turned thin. "They knew," I whispered. Father Daniel didn't flinch. "Then we document that too," he said. At the meeting with the bishop, I expected legal language and cold distance. Instead, the man stood, walked around the desk, and knelt in front of me like I was the one with authority. "I'm sorry," he said, and his eyes shone with shame. "Do you know how strange it feels to receive an apology you needed 30 years earlier? It doesn't erase harm, but it loosens a knot in the chest. The bishop warned me, people would attack my character, lawsuits might come, and many would cling to Father Callahan because they'd built their lives around his image. Still, he promised process, transparency, and protection. I asked for one thing: keep Lily's name out of it. The bishop agreed. Father Daniel agreed. Then came the day I feared most, speaking in public, in the town that had turned my escape into a legend. The room was packed. I stood under harsh lights and told the truth plainly, without flourishes, because truth doesn't need decoration. I spoke of 4 sisters, not 5, sparing Lily the spotlight. When I finished, the silence was heavy enough to bend shoulders. Then a retired teacher stood up and said, "I believe you." One voice became another. A man admitted his sister left the convent years earlier and never explained why. An older woman confessed she'd heard rumors and refused to think them possible. Others stayed angry, calling me bitter, claiming I wanted attention. Isn't denial easier than admitting you applauded the wrong man? Newspapers arrived. Father Callahan's lawyers arrived. Threats appeared on my porch at night. Yet something else arrived too, other victims, older now, brave now, stepping into the open because a door had finally cracked. The case grew teeth. Church investigators couldn't pretend anymore. Father Callahan was removed from duty while proceedings began. He filed complaints, called me unstable, tried to paint me as a liar from a forgotten era. But Beatrice's notebook held steady, and the old letter sealed the pattern like wax. A year later, the ruling came. He was stripped of his status and sent away quietly. No jail, time had stolen that possibility. But his power was gone. I didn't celebrate. I sat at my kitchen table and felt something like stillness settle in. The predator who used holiness as camouflage was now just an aging man with no pulpit. He left town at night, the way we once did, and I thought, so the road can be shared by both the hunted and the hunter. Years later, I learned he died far away, alone, with no crowd to applaud him. I felt no joy, only an ending. Meanwhile, the old convent building had been turned into a community facility, and with the bishop's support and Father Daniel's stubborn help, I helped remake it again, into a center for healing, legal aid, and counseling. Lily came back after her husband died and her children grew. She worked beside me quietly, helping young women fill out forms, make calls, breathe through panic. She never needed a microphone to prove her courage. On the grounds, we placed 5 stone benches with our real names, so nobody could bury us under borrowed paperwork ever again. When I walk past them, I can almost hear June's laugh, feel Clara's flower-dusted hands, see Beatrice's thoughtful eyes, and remember Lily's brave little spine straightening day by day. You can lose your name and still keep your soul. So what did I learn, sitting here as an old woman telling you this? First, faith is not obedience to a person. Faith is devotion to what is right, even when it costs you. Second, institutions can fail, but community can mend, if people stop protecting reputations and start protecting the vulnerable. Third, forgiveness is not a command you swallow, it's a release you choose when you're ready. I forgave myself for running. I forgave the women who stayed silent out of fear. I even forgave God for the years I thought he'd looked away, because I finally recognized him in the hands that helped us, Mr. Harlan's, Father Daniel's, and ours. If you've listened this far, then you understand how truth can take decades to find daylight. Before I go, I want to ask you something. If a young woman came to you trembling, would you demand perfect proof, or would you offer safe shelter first? And if this story moved you, please tap like and consider subscribing to Dust of Old Days. Your attention keeps stories like this from being buried again. Leave a comment with the words, "I believe you," not for me, but for anyone still afraid to speak. And remember, sweetheart, the safest lie is still a lie, and it always charges interest.